Hey everybody, today I'm going to recap how we trim our hydrangeas. And before you do any trimming, it's important that you identify what type of hydrangea you have. Now don't worry, you don't have to know the exact type of hydrangea or what its name is. You just need to know what family it belongs to. And identifying what family it belongs to is usually pretty easy. So I'm going to give you some tips here. So I'm going to start with the panicle varieties or paniculata. That's like this one here. This is a limelight hydrangea. And these you can identify pretty easily because they have what we call a cone-shaped flower heads. So they're going to be narrow on top, wider on the bottom. They usually start out white or ivory, and then they'll blush to either a pink or a red, or a lot of times they'll end up parchment at the end of the season. So those we usually know. Limelight's a popular one, vanilla strawberry, but there are several other types. So this is the most common kind of flower type of panicle hydrangea, but this one here is also a panicle hydrangea. This is a quick fire. Also in this category would be like the Pinky Winky. The difference between the two is that this one has more, so these are the sterile florets, the ones that you see here, the big broad kind of petaled ones, and then underneath are the fertile florets. And so these types we kind of call more lacy or lace cap types. They're going to have those exposed ones, but these still, if you look, they are still kind of panicle shaped. So they do kind of start out narrow, get wide, they do start out white or ivory, and they do change color. So they are in the exact same family, but the flowers could trip you up a little because you might think that it's a lace cap, so it couldn't possibly be. That's not the case. So just want to make sure you knew that. Now I'm going to kind of get into how we trim them. So with these panicle varieties, we do prune them when they're dormant. So you can do it in the fall, you can do it in the spring before the leaves emerge. It's not going to make a big difference. A lot of people only do them in the spring. We do them in the fall, and we've had no problems at all. So it's not a big deal. Now when it comes to these kind, the biggest thing you need to know is don't panic. This is probably one of the most forgiving hydrangeas out there as far as pruning and trimming. They tend to be able to handle anything. So some people will just go through and they say, you know what, I'm just trimming off the flower heads. So they just cut those off and they're done with them. And that's what they leave, and it's just fine. Also, if you did no trimming at all, they're going to be fine later on as well. Now, you can also kind of go back a little bit more if you wanted to, or you could look at where they were trimmed last year, trim them right back to that point. And if you felt like they needed a really hard prune, or you wanted to kind of give them a big rejuvenation prune, you can cut them right back down to here. I have one hydrangea out there that, so one year it was a tree form. So it was on the big long 3-foot stem, and then it would come out, or maybe it was actually 4 or 5 feet even. It was pretty big. Anyway, got caught in a storm and it broke off. And I thought, well, it's done for. But I just left it, and that thing has resprouted. I'll show you later on in the video how that thing looks now. You'll be amazed that that thing was just a stick going up. All the branches came off. There were no leaves on it at all, and this had happened in late June. So it was pretty far along at that point. So it wasn't like it happened during the winter, or it wasn't like it happened, before it had any leaves. It was pretty much snapped right off. And so they're pretty impressive that way. Now we can go to there, we could go back over here. Again, we could do that hard prune. But one thing that we usually do first is we'll look, and sometimes I do this after I kind of get a main prune, and sometimes I do it before. We look at kind of the skeleton of it, because now that the leaves are gone, it's easy to see. I notice here I have this, kind of horizontal branch. I don't really like how that's growing. I prefer my hydrangeas to be growing upwards, so I just go in and I'm going to snip that one off kind of close to the stem there. The rest of these, I'm trying to also look to see if there's any, like what I call cross branches, ones that eventually are going to start hitting other ones. So when I look at this one, it's growing into these other ones. As this one gets thicker, I think it's going to start rubbing up against the other branches. So I don't really want that one, and I don't really need it. So then the other thing that I can look at is if I want to see where it was pruned last year. Let me find a good example. So let's look at this. There's a stem coming up. It comes up. And it was pruned right here last year. It was pruned really close to its growth node, so it ended up still growing from that spot. We don't usually recommend cutting that close to a growth node. Usually we go a little bit lower. And then you can see that promoted growth down here. So 3 branches came off of where there was 1. So that's kind of, an interesting little tidbit on that one. So what I can do is I can look at these other 2 and I can say, hey, I'm going to look at the growth nodes and I'm going to just trim back. So there's these little bulges. These are where the leaves come out. Here's one growth node. Here's a second one. Here's a third, fourth, fifth. What we usually say is leave at least 2 nodes. So I could go through and just kind of count and just keep doing that. Now this little one, well, you know what? We're going to just see. We're going to leave that one going. So I'm going to just keep doing that with all of these. I'm leaving 2 or 3 growth nodes. This one here, I'm going to trim back. I have 1, 2. I'm going to go back a little bit more because I'd love for it to kind of fill out more down here because I'd like a nice full area there. And so we can just kind of keep doing this by hand. and kind of doing that measuring, it doesn't really matter. Like, and you're also kind of looking at the shape. There's going to be some times when you're going to say, oh, I want to give it a little more action. You know, I want it to give it more place to grow. Let me just see. And everybody does it a little bit different. And you know what? These things are so forgiving that they tend to just behave and do what they're supposed to. So we're always grateful for hydrangeas for that, because up here they're pretty easy to grow. They're very hardy, so they're hardy to zone 3 for most of the panicle varieties anyway. There's some that might be a little bit less, but the ones that we carry are all, for the most part, zone 3, and we've had really good luck with them. So there we go. So now I've trimmed this back. You can see, maybe I'll just trim this. You know what? I'm just gonna cut it all the way back. I bet there's gonna be leaves growing right here next year. I'm guessing, but that's how I guess. So I'm looking at this, and we're gonna look at shape. Now there is a little bit of a problem here. This branch is rubbing up against this one. So I'm kind of tempted to just take it out, because I'm gonna just show you, see how they keep rubbing. Eventually you're going to grow together, but they also could just kind of keep rubbing and cause a problem. So I'm going to pick, which one do I want to get rid of? I think I'm going to get rid of this one here, and I'm just kind of taking it out. Again, I'm not panicked about this, because this thing's going to have all kinds of new growth next year. All the flowers appear in the new growth, so I don't have to panic. Now, you can still use these. Now, you know, this is kind of all parchment colored, kind of brown, but a lot of people will spray paint these. So they'll spray paint them either like gold or ivory or pink or whatever color they like. I usually just take the leaves off of them, and then, you know, you can use them for craft projects or whatever. They hold up really well. Now, the same is going to be true for like this quick fire. The nice thing about quick fires is that they have an even more tidy habit than some of the other hydrangeas. So these are always super easy, because you can just kind of go through. You don't even have to do the count, because once you do one, you just kind of keep them all similar. But they tend to grow in a nice kind of uniform shape. And that's one thing I really like about them. They also tend to get better fall color than some of the other panicle hydrangeas. And they're also really early bloomers. So let's put that one there. So there we go. These are done. There's nothing else we need to do with these. Just let them kind of do their thing for the winter. Now, as they get bigger, you know, you might do different things with them. Like sometimes people like kind of more of, I'm going to say, the Japanese maple kind of look to their hydrangeas. So when it gets a little bit bigger, they'll go through and like cut off some of these side branches and just encourage it to keep going up, so then it looks a little more craggy. People like that. So that's the story on panicle. So now let's move on to one of the other varieties. So the next family of hydrangea I'm going to tell you about are the arborescent varieties. And these are the ones that have more of the ball shape. Sometimes they'll have more of a dome shape flower head, and they tend to have kind of those smaller petals, although you can see there's quite a bit of variation from, you know, kind of really petite petals to a little bit bigger. But one thing they have in common is that they do kind of dome out, or they create a ball. The other thing that you'll want to know is that they're usually white, so that would be like the Annabelle, the Incredible. But then there's also several that are pink or have like a blush color to them. So the Invincible series has a lot of pink ones. That's what one of these are. I think this is Invincible Ruby. And this one kind of starts darker, and then it kind of gets paler as the season goes on. I don't have any that we didn't trim yet, but you're going to be able to tell what I mean. And the big difference, and I'm going to show you right over here, is that unlike the panicle varieties, which kind of grow more from like a single trunk, although sometimes the branches are really low and it starts to branch out right away, it does go back down to a single trunk. This variety here grows in this clump, and as the plant matures, this kind of clump or this cluster gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the great thing about that is that it makes this variety, the arborescent family, the easiest to divide. So over time, you can just take a spade, and I could run it down the middle of that, divide it up, and kind of keep spreading it out. Now, I like to wait until I can definitely see kind of an obvious spot to kind of cut it off and let it go. So it can be a little bit tricky as far as that goes. You don't want to do it when it's too small, although they tend to be really good. Like I've seen people just trim out like, one or two of these sticks, and as long as there's roots, it usually takes. It just takes a little longer. So being able to divide them is really a good asset with those. What we do with these though is that we really just can hack them back. So we always use a hedge trimmer with them, but you can use your pruners depending on what size the plant is. But like a lot of people have different ideas of how far back you can go. So some people say you should go like a foot because then those stems kind of become supports for the plants next year. We usually go 6 inches or so. I'm going to say this is 6 to 8 inches right here. So that works for us. I've seen people mow them right down. I wouldn't recommend going all the way down like that, but people have done it and the plant survives. So this is another one that's super hardy, kind of hard to mix up. So that it's a good one for that. So this one's very easy. I actually had done the ones in front of the house and I just took the hedge trimmer, took them down, no problem, pretty darn easy. The only thing is I didn't follow my own advice. I wasn't paying really close attention and I cut the phone line that was going into the house. So be careful if you are using a hedger of any kind of wires whatsoever, and also things like, you know, fencing or any kind of garden art that you have, you don't want to be running your hedger into that. So I learned that. I've done it a million times and you'd think I'd learned my lesson, but I still do it. So anyway, now on to the next variety. The next family of hydrangeas I want to talk about is pretty much a catch-all for all the other varieties that pretty much grow in northern Michigan. So this is the do not trim this time of year family. So that's going to include like this one here. This is a macrophylla, and macrophylla includes like your endless summer hydrangeas. There's several other ones out there as well. And those are the ones that are usually pink and then they can be blue depending on the acidity of your soil. There are some white varieties out there as well, and they tend to be also called mophead. They have really kind of thick, kind of spongy leaves. They tend to have big giant flower heads and kind of those bright colors as well. The other variety that would be similar would be the serrata or mountain hydrangea. Those a lot of times will have a little bit more of the lace cap, but they're going to be similar with the pink or the blue, that type of flower. So that's something to keep in mind. And then corsifolia, which is the oak leaf variety. And the oak leaf is going to have, it has kind of more of a panicle shaped flower. It looks a little bit like the Pinky Winky with a lot of those, both the sterile and the fertile florets exposed. But that's the one that gets the beautiful fall color and also has really noticeable oak leaves. So that one's easy to spot because you're going to look at the leaves. For all of these varieties, if I did want to do any pruning, I could just cut off the flowers. And when I do these, I just cut off the flower heads like right off at the top. And then I kind of look and I can see where there's potential growth for next season. So that's all I would do is cut the flowers off. This one here is an endless summer that I think it's bloomed twice in almost 20 years. So I'm shocked at how many blooms it had this year. So something magic happened. I think it knew that I was getting a little fed up with it and I was ready to move it. And then it decided, okay, I will bloom. And it looked great this year. So thank you for blooming. I really do appreciate it. So that pretty much covers all the different varieties that, you know, grow in our area. Fact of the matter is, for the most part, hydrangeas, even if you prune them wrong, they don't usually die unless you prune them right down to the ground. So you're pretty safe that way. But for best flowers, remember, the macrophyllas, serratas, and corsifolias, those are going to be the ones that you don't prune now. The only time you want to, like if you wanted to pick flowers when they're blooming, you can do that, or right after they flower, you can kind of cut those stems back and then it will have time to produce new blooms. But if you do them now when the plant's going dormant, you're going to be cutting off blooms and you're going to sacrifice that plant. When it comes to the paniculata and the arborescent, boy, those things are so easy and so forgiving. Don't panic at all if you have those kind. Do you remember that hydrangea tree that I told you snapped in a storm right at the trunk, had no branches, no leaves? Well, this is what it looks like now. It's absolutely fantastic. It has completely recovered and it is basically now one of the fullest hydrangea trees we have. It looks really great. And just to show you how resilient these plants are to pruning, I'm going to just use a hedger this time instead of hand pruning and show you exactly how I do that. You might have noticed as I was trimming it, I was looking very closely at it and trying to get it more in kind of a dome or a ball shape. That's just because I want to kind of keep that kind of shape going. And now I'm going to take a closer look because this one has lots of branches. There's going to be a lot of crossing branches. So I'm going to just try to find some of the branches that I think need to be trimmed out. So I'm looking over here and I'm seeing like there's this really strong branch here that's going straight up, but it's already rubbing up against that one. So I'm going to take that one out. I'm going to take this one out. And you know, one of the advantages to kind of cutting these back now is that it is going to give more energy to the other branches, and so hopefully those will kind of grow a little bit stronger. And so that's kind of important that we keep that in mind. And boy, this thing really is very, very dense with its branching. So let's see what happens here. You can tell it's growing a little different than some of the other ones like this because they don't usually have this much. Now here's one that's kind of growing outwards, but I think I'm gonna, well, should I trim that one? See, this is kind of what you end up doing, is you're kind of playing a game with yourself, trying to decide, you know, do I trim, do I not trim? Definitely want to get some of these bad ones out. In fact, I'm going to take this whole one, make that one gone. So let's see, what else needs to kind of go? It's really tricky, kind of making these decisions. I feel like, you know, I feel like it's a bigger decision than it really is. I think I can just take this one out. I think, see how it's kind of growing so horizontal and then it's sticking these out. So I'm going to just cut that one back. What else do I want to get rid of? So over here, I feel like this one can go. This one can go. I don't know. You know, everybody's going to trim them a little bit different. So I don't feel like there's a definite right or wrong way on some of these. Let's see. So, but it is nice once they're kind of trimmed back a little bit, you can kind of get a better view of these, you know, the sticks and the branches and get a sense of how you want to trim them back. And then the plant's going to just grow the way it wants to grow. So it'll let us know next year if it likes this or if it wants it to grow in a little bit different way. So I'm cutting back quite a few of these. I just feel like it doesn't need all these branches growing quite the way they are. You know, it's gonna kind of end up the way it's gonna end up. So we'll see how this all plays out. 1, 2. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop here. This is gonna be good enough for now. It's not perfect, but it probably will be perfect when we look at it next season. I hope this video gives you some confidence in trimming your hydrangeas. I know it can be a little bit stressful, but don't worry, these plants are pretty hardy. They can handle a little bit of abuse, so even small mistakes aren't going to kill the plant, so it'll forgive you, I promise. Now, I didn't mention the climbing hydrangea, also called the petiolaris, and that one falls into that third family, the one that we don't prune now. We wait until after it's done flowering. That's the, you know, after its first flush of flowers, that's the best time to prune that one as well. Now, if you're kind of curious about this hydrangea right here, with the extremely large flowers and really strong stems, this is a new variety that I was testing out, and I'm going to tell you all about that in the next video.